Have you heard a story so bitter, so cruel, that your heart aches long after it ends? Listen closely, for this is not just a story. It is a wound carved into the soul of a young girl named Kambili, a wound she never asked for, one she carried because of something as simple as brushing her teeth. How dare you brush your teeth? Those were the words that shattered her spirit. Words so sharp that they could pierce even a bone. Kambili was only 13, a quiet girl with eyes too soft for the world, and a heart that beat too quickly for those around her. She had lost her parents in a car crash just months before, leaving her in the care of her aunt, a woman whose smile hid more venom than a snake. That morning, Kambili had woken before dawn, rinsed her small toothbrush, and gently scrubbed away the sourness of sleep from her mouth. She only wanted to feel clean, to greet the day without shame. But when her aunt's shadow fell across the doorway, what followed would be the beginning of a nightmare that would make even the strongest weep. The slap came before Kambili could even turn her head, a heavy ringing blow that sent her stumbling against the wall, her toothbrush clattering to the floor. Her aunt, a tall woman named Madame Ifoma, loomed over her like a dark cloud ready to release rain. Who gave you the right to use toothpaste in my house? Her voice roared, echoing through the walls like thunder. Kambili's lips trembled as she tried to explain, whispering, I just wanted my mouth to be clean before school. But her aunt's eyes narrowed, sharp and gleaming like broken glass. Clean? Did you say clean? She spat, her voice rising. You, an orphan, have the audacity to waste my toothpaste as though you were a queen in this house? When your parents left you with nothing but debt, you still dare to act like you matter? Kambili's chest tightened, not from the slap, but from the words that cut deeper. The bathroom smelled of soup, but Kambili felt like the air itself was choking her. She bent to pick up her toothbrush, her fingers trembling, but her aunt's foot came down hard, crushing it into the wet towels. Look at me, Kambili, Madame Ifoma hissed, her heavy breathing sour with rage. The girl raised her eyes, her cheeks already swelling from the blow. In this house, you will not behave as though you are a princess. You will not use what you did not buy. Even a toothbrush, even a drop of paste must be earned. Do you understand me? Kambili nodded quickly, though her lips quivered. She wanted to tell her aunt that she had woken early every day to sweep the compound, scrub the floors, and even polish her aunt's shoes before school. Wasn't that enough to end the mercy of toothpaste? But the words never left her tongue. Her silence angered the former further. She grabbed Kambili by her arm, her nails digging deep into her skin, and dragged her into the compound. The morning sun had barely risen, but neighbors already peeked from their windows, curious about the commotion. Tell the world, Madame Ifoma bellowed, her voice louder than a trumpet. This girl thinks she deserves luxuries, like a rich man's daughter, brushing her teeth when she has no father, no mother and no right. Humiliation burned hotter than the sun. Kambili stood barefoot on the cold sandy ground as her aunt shoved the broken toothbrush into her trembling hands. From now on, you will rinse your mouth with only water. No more paste, no more brushing, unless you can buy it yourself. Maybe then you'll learn your place. The neighbors all whispered, some shaking their heads, whilst others laughed quietly, as if Kambili's pain were entertainment. Her cousin Adobe, Madame Ifoma's spoiled daughter, leaned against the doorway with a smirk, her pearly white teeth glistening. Teeth brushed with the same toothpaste that Kambili had been denied. Maybe if you didn't act so pitiful, Auntie wouldn't be so hard on you, Adobe sneered, swirling her braid around her finger. Kambili said nothing. Her throat was tight, her chest aching as though she had swallowed stone. That day at school, she kept her head down, afraid to speak too closely to anyone, afraid they would smell her unbrushed breath. Her friends asked why she was quiet, why her cheek was red and swollen, but she only smiled faintly, saying that she was tired. Inside, however, she wondered how bad brushing her teeth, something so small and ordinary, could become a crime. Days turned into weeks, And every morning was the same ritual of shame. Kambili would rinse her mouth before the sun, fetch water, sweep the house, and stare longingly at the untouched tube of toothpaste on the sink. Her aunt and cousin used it freely, their laughter echoing through the house as they hummed and spat into the sink, their teeth gleaming like pearls. Meanwhile, Kambili cupped water in her hand, swishing it around her mouth as if that could scrub away the sour taste of humiliation. At school, whispers began to follow her. Some of her classmates, who noticed her hesitant smile and faint breath, started calling her mouth odor Kambi. Every insult landed like a stone, building a wall of shame around her young heart. She began sitting at the far corner of the class, avoiding laughter, avoiding close conversations, shrinking smaller with each passing day. Her teachers noticed the change. The once bright girl now moved like a shadow, her eyes dim, her lips pressed tightly as she held back tears. And every evening, when she returned home and knelt before her aunt, begging silently with her eyes for kindness, she would hear the same cold words. In this house, even cleanliness must be earned. Kambili often thought of her mother in those silent mornings. Mama, with her gentle smile and soft hands, used to kneel by her bed each night, whispering, "My Kambi, always keep yourself clean. No matter how poor we are, no one can take away your dignity. If you care for yourself." Her mother would hand her the little toothbrush and dab of toothpaste, laughing softly when Kambili puffed her cheeks with bubbles. Now, each time she cupped water in her palms, swishing it around her mouth, she felt like she was betraying that memory, a symbol of everything she had lost. At night, when the compound was quiet, Kambili would lie awake on the thin mat in the corner of the kitchen, where she slept every night, clutching her mother's faded scarf. She would whisper to herself, "Mama, I'm trying, but it's so hard." And then, in the darkness, tears would slip silently down her cheeks, soaking the scarf. The humiliation was heavy enough, but the grief of knowing her mother's voice, her comfort, her protection was gone. That was the wound that cut deepest. One evening, after another long day of chores, Kambili returned from fetching water only to find her aunt waiting with crossed arms at the doorway. "Come here," Madame Ifoma barked, her voice as cold as the harmattan wind. Kambili set the bucket down carefully, her arms aching from the long walk. She stood before her aunt, her head bowed low. "Your teacher came here today," Ifoma said, her tone dripping with disdain. "She told me you stopped talking in class, that you keep to yourself like some cursed child. Are you trying to bring shame to this family? Do you want people to say that I mistreat you?" The words stung, not because they weren't true, but because Ifoma only cared about appearances, never about her heart. "Answer me!" Ifoma snapped, grabbing Kambili's chin and forcing her to look up. "Do you want me to look like a monster in this community because of you?" Kambili shook her head quickly, the tears burning in her eyes, but the truth sat heavy in her chest. Ifoma did not need Kambili to make her look like a monster. Her cruelty was loud enough on its own. The cruelty deepened that night. After dinner, Madame Ifoma sat in the parlor, laughing with her daughter Adobe over plates of fried plantain. She called Kambili over, her smile as sharp as the blade she used to cut the fruit. "Kambili, since you want to act like a princess who brushes her teeth, I'll give you a lesson." She held out a bucket filled with ash and salt. "Every morning from now on, you will scrub your mouth with this instead of water. Let us see if it will remind you where you belong." Adobe giggled, covering her mouth dramatically. "At least, now your breath will match your new name. Ashmouth Kambi." Kambi's fingers trembled as she took the bucket. The gritty mixture stung her tongue and gums the first time she used it, leaving tiny cuts that bled. But she endured it all. She didn't cry, at least not where anyone could see. Her tears were for the night, when the house was quiet, when only rats scurried around the floor, and she could bury her face into the mat, whispering to the shadows, "Mama, Papa, why did you leave me here?" she said as tears poured down her eyes. At school, her suffering began to show. Her lips were often cracked and swollen from the harsh scrubbing. Her smile, faint and pained. Some classmates whispered cruelly, but others noticed something else: the deep sadness behind her eyes. One day, Chika, a soft spoken girl from her class, approached her during lunch. Cambi, she said gently, offering her a piece of bread. Why don't you smile anymore? Cambili stared at the bread, her throat tightening. No one had asked her such a kind question in weeks. She forced a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. I'm just tired, she murmured. Chika pressed the bread into her hand anyway. Here, my mother says sharing food makes the heart lighter. Maybe it will help. Kambili wanted to tell her everything about her aunt, about the toothpaste, about how something so simple had turned her life into a parade of shame. But the words felt like stones in her throat. Instead, she whispered, Thank you, and held the bread close, not because she was hungry, but because someone had cared enough to see her. But kindness, as brief as it was, did not shield her from what came next. One Saturday morning, Madame Ifoma discovered that Kambili had been saving a few coins from the change that she received while running errands. The girl had quietly planned to buy her own toothbrush and a small packet of paste from the market, so she would no longer have to rely on her aunt's grudging mercy. But when Ifoma found the coins hidden beneath Kambili's mat, rage erupted like a storm. She grabbed Kambili by the arm and dragged her into the yard, the coins clinking into her clenched fist. So now you are stealing my change to feed your pride? She roared, her voice drawing the neighbors once again. You dare to act like you can provide for yourself in my house? Before Kambili could explain, the sting of another slap sent her sprawling to the ground. Her aunt scattered the coins into the sand and crushed them beneath her heels. From now on, you will not touch money in this house unless I hand it to you. And forget about buying any toothbrush. You will live as you are, humble, quiet, and reminded daily of what you truly are. That night, after the coins had been scattered and her dignity ground into dirt, Kambili sat in the corner of the kitchen, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The house was silent, except for the occasional croak of frogs outside. She stared at the moonlight, spilling through the tiny window, and whispered, Mama, I wish you could come take me away, even if it's to heaven. I'm so tired. Her chest heaved as she cried softly, the kind of tears that made no sound because there was no one left to comfort her. But as she wept, something shifted deep inside her. The fear she had been swallowing for weeks hardened into a quiet resolve. One day, she murmured, wiping her face with her sleeve, I will not live like this. I will not let anyone tell me I don't deserve to be clean, to be cared for, to be loved. She didn't know how she would escape her aunt's iron grip, but for the first time since her parents' death, a small flame of defiance flickered in her heart. It was faint, but it was enough to keep her from breaking entirely. The next morning, as the rooster crowed and the compound stared awake, Kambili rose with a new kind of quiet determination. She swept the yard, fetched the water, and polished her aunt's shoes as usual. But this time, she did it with a strange calmness that unsettled Madame Ifoma. Over breakfast, Ifoma narrowed her eyes at the girl. Why are you so quiet today? Are you plotting something? Kambili kept her gaze low and shook her head. No, auntie, I am only tired. But inside, her mind was racing. She thought of her parents, old friends, people who had once visited their home during their happier days. Could one of them help her? Would any of them even remember her? That afternoon, on her way back from the market, she passed by Mama Nkechi's shop, a woman who had been her mother's closest friend. The sight of her warm smile nearly broke Kambili in half. She hesitated by the doorway, clutching the small bundle of vegetables she carried, wondering if she should speak. But fear held her tongue. What if her aunt found out that she spoke to anyone about her suffering? That hesitation did not last. Mama Nkechi, noticing the gauntness of Kambili's face and the sadness in her eyes, called out softly, Kambili, my dear, is that you? The girl froze, tears welling in her eyes before she could stop them. She turned slowly, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, Mama Nkechi, it's me. The older woman stepped closer, wiping her hands on her wrapper. She gently cupped Camberly's face, tilting it towards the sunlight. The swollen cheeks, the cracked lips, the bruises. They told the story even Camberly did not have to speak aloud. What has this woman done to you? Mama Nkechi asked, her tone trembling with both anger and sorrow. Camberly's lips parted, but the words tangled in her throat. She wanted to spill everything about the toothbrush, the salt, the ash, the endless humiliation. But years of fear held her back. Instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, I just brushed my teeth, Mama Nkechi, and since that day, my life has not been the same. Those words alone were enough. Mama Nkechi's face hardened, and in that moment, she silently vowed that she would not let this continue. That evening, as Camberly returned home, she noticed her aunt whispering to a neighbor, her eyes darting sharply in her direction. A chill crept up her spine. She knew Ifeoma suspected she had spoken to someone, though she hadn't confessed a thing. At dinner, her aunt's silence was heavier than her usual insult. It was the kind of silence that threatened a storm. Camberly kept her head bowed, forcing the lump of gari down her throat, despite her trembling hands. Adobe sensing the tension, smirked and muttered under her breath, Ashmouth is going to learn another lesson soon. That night, as Camberly lay on her mat, the dread was so thick that she could barely breathe. But just as she began to drift into restless sleep, there was a soft knock at the kitchen window. Startled, she sat up. When she peeked outside, she saw Mama Nkechi's familiar face in the moonlight. The older woman held up a small parcel wrapped in cloth and whispered urgently, Camby, take this, and tomorrow meet me by the well before school. We must talk. The girl's heart pounded. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. Inside the parcel was a brand new toothbrush, a small tube of toothpaste, and a note written in Mama Nkechi's handwriting. You are not a burden. You are not unworthy. Clean yourself, child. You deserve it. We'll find a way to free you. Camberly clutched the items to her chest, her tears soaking the paper. That night, for the first time since her parents' death, she smiled, a small fragile smile, but one that reached her heart. The next morning, long before her aunt stirred, she crept quietly into the bathroom, locked the creaky door, and brushed her teeth. The mint stung her cracked lips as well as her bleeding gums, but it felt like healing, like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been stolen. She looked into the mirror above the sink, her reflection pale and worn, but her teeth glimmered faintly in the early light. Mama, she whispered to the air, I am still your Camby. I will not forget who I am. She slipped the toothbrush into her pocket, careful to hide it, and headed towards the well to meet Mama Nkechi. She didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain. The chains of her aunt's cruelty were beginning to crack. By the time the first streaks of dawn painted the sky, Camby was already at the well, clutching her faded school bag and the toothbrush hidden deep within. Mama Nkechi arrived, her wrapper tied firmly around her waist, her face stern but warm. Camby, she said softly, pulling the girl close. I will not let that woman break you. Your mother was my sister in all but blood, and she begged me before she died to always look after you. I failed you when I stayed silent, but not anymore. Tears welled in Camberly's eyes as she whispered, She hates me for brushing my teeth, Mama Nkechi, for wanting to feel clean. She calls me a burden, a thief, a disgrace. Mama Nkechi's jaw tightened. It is not about the toothpaste, my child. Some people carry darkness so deep that they cannot stand to see another hold on to even a spark of light. But we will never let her take yours away. She handed Camberly some coins. Keep this. Hide it well. We are going to make plans. But until then, hold your head high. Do not let her see your fear. For a few days, things went quietly. Camberly carefully brushed her teeth only before dawn, when the house was still. She felt a small piece of her confidence returning. At school, her smile was shy but no longer pain, and her classmates began to notice the difference. But peace in Madame Ifeoma's house was never meant to last. One Saturday morning, as Camberly slipped into the bathroom before anyone awoke, she didn't realize that Dobby had been awake, peeking from the hallway. The moment Kambili pulled out the toothbrush, Adobe's eyes lit up with malicious glee. She tiptoed back to her mother's room and whispered, Mama, Kambili is stealing again. She has a new toothbrush. I saw it. Ifoma's fury ignited like dry grass touched by fire. Without a word, she stormed to the bathroom, kicked the door open and yanked Kambili by her braided hair. The toothbrush fell to the floor, clattering against the tile like a confession. You dare defy me? Ifoma roared, her voice rattling the walls. You dare make me look like a fool? After I told you, no brushing, no paste, unless you earn it? The punishment was swift and cruel. Madame Ifoma dragged Kambili into the courtyard, barefoot and trembling, while Adobe followed, smirking as if it were a festival. The neighbors gathered once again, drawn by the shouting. Ifoma held up the toothbrush like a piece of forbidden treasure. Look at this, she shouted to the onlookers. An orphan girl, stealing and hiding luxury items while living under my roof, eating my food, wearing my clothes. Tell me, does she need a lesson? The murmurs from the crowd were mixed. Some whispered pity, others nodded in agreement. Before anyone could stop her, Ifoma threw the toothbrush into the fire, watching it curl and melt in the flames. Kambili's knees buckled as she cried out, Please, that was all I had. But Ifoma's eyes were cold, her voice sharp as a blade. You will learn humility, Kambili. You will learn that in this house, you own nothing, not even your own breath. The words struck harder than any slap, leaving Kambili's spirit cracking like dry earth under scorching sun. Just as Ifoma raised her hand to deliver another blow, a firm voice cut through the chaos. Enough, Ifoma! Everyone turned to see Mama Nkechi standing at the gate, her posture steady, her eyes blazing with controlled fury. She stepped into the compound, her presence commanding silence. I have watched you humiliate this child long enough, she said, her voice low but firm. Her mother entrusted her to you, not to crush her, not to strip her of every shred of dignity, but to care for her. Ifoma scoffed, crossing her arms. This is my house, Nkechi. You have no right to tell me how to run it. She steals, she lies, but Mama Nkechi cut her short. She survives, Mama Nkechi interrupted. She turned to the neighbors, her voice rising. Is it stealing for a girl to want to clean her teeth? Is it a crime to want to feel human? Murmurs rippled around the crowd. Louder now, some nodding in agreement. Ifoma's confidence smirk faltered as the weight of the stairs pressed against her, but still, her pride would not bend. She's my responsibility, Ifoma hissed, and you will not take her from me. Mama Nkechi stepped closer, her eyes locking onto Ifoma's. Then, treat her like the child that she is, not a servant, not an animal, or I swear by the memory of her parents, I will take her away from this place and raise her myself. The courtyard went silent. The neighbors, emboldened by Mama Nkechi's words, began to murmur louder, some even speaking up. It's true, one old woman muttered. The girl is just a child. She deserves better. Another man added, even an orphan should not be denied the right to wash herself. This is wickedness. Ifoma's face tightened, her pride and fear wearing silently. For a long moment, the air was thick with tension. Finally, she spat on the ground and turned away. Take her then, she said coldly. Take your precious little princess, but do not expect me to care if she starves, for she is no longer my problem. Kambili trembled, her eyes wide, as she turned and looked at Mama Nkechi, who reached out and wrapped her in a firm protective embrace. For the first time in months, Kambili felt safe. The walk to Mama Nkechi's home felt like crossing from one world into another. Kambili, clutching her school bag, glanced back at her aunt's compound, the shadows of neighbors still whispering. All of it looked smaller now, as though it had shrunk the moment she stepped away. But the fear lingered, stitching into her bones. As they reached Mama Nkechi's house, the older woman knelt before her and held her hand gently. You are safe here, Kambili, she whispered. Your mother would never forgive me if I let you rot in that place a day longer. For the first time in months, Kambili felt the weight of her chest lift slightly. When she entered the small tidy room that Mama Nkechi had prepared for her, she saw a folded blanket, a pillow, and a small wooden table where a new toothbrush and toothpaste rested, as though they had been waiting just for her. Her knees buckled as she wept openly, her sobs shaking through her frail frame. Mama Nkechi pulled her into a firm embrace and murmured, "Cry, my child, cry it all out. But remember, this is not the end of your story." The following weeks were like tasting sunlight after living in shadows. Mama Nkechi enrolled Kambili in weekend lessons to help her catch up in school, fed her warm meals, and reminded her each day, "You are not a burden. You are a child who deserves love." Slowly, Kambili's posture straightened, her shy smile returned, though it still carried traces of her suffering. Yet, despite her new safety, the scars lingered, not just the bruises, but the memories of shame. Each morning, as she brushed her teeth in Mama Nkechi's house, she would pause, staring at her reflection. "How could something so small make me feel so worthless?" she often whispered. Mama Nkechi would overhear sometimes and answer softly from the doorway, because it was never about the toothbrush, Kambili. It was about control. Some people cannot stand to see another human carry even a shred of dignity when they are filled with bitterness, but you must never let their darkness define you. Your light, no matter how small, is stronger. Those words became Kambili's balm, a reminder that she was more than the cruelty that she had endured. Months later, Campbell returned to her old school, not as the timid girl who hid in corners, but as someone who had begun to heal. Her classmates were stunned by the change, her uniform crisp, her smile steady, her voice no longer trembling when she spoke. Chika, the girl who had once offered her bread, hugged her tightly. "Kambili, you're back," she whispered, her eyes shining. Kambili smiled softly and said, "I never left. I just needed someone to remind me who I was." Though whispers still circled about her time with her aunt, Kambili stood firm, no longer crumbling under the weight of gossip. One afternoon, during a school assembly, the principal announced that Kambili had been awarded a scholarship for academic excellence. As she walked to the stage to receive the certificate, she thought of her mother's voice. "Always keep yourself clean, my Kambi. No matter how poor we are, no one can take that away from you." Tears filled her eyes as the applause echoed. In that moment, she realized the truth. Her aunt's cruelty had tried to break her, but it had only made her fight harder for the dignity that her mother had instilled in her. News of Campbell's scholarship eventually reached Madame Ifoma, carried by gossip and the tongues of neighbors. At first, Ifoma scoffed, muttering, "Let her shine for now. She'll still fail, just like her parents." But late at night, when Adobe slept and the compound was silent, Ifoma sat alone in her parlor, staring at the empty chair where Kambili once knelt to polish her shoes. A strange heaviness pressed on her chest. It was not love, not regret, but something colder. The hollow weight of realizing that she had driven away the only soul who had looked at her with hope, even in the face of cruelty. She poured herself a drink, her hand trembling, and whispered to herself, "All this over a toothbrush?" But pride, her constant companion, swallowed the rest of the thought. She would never apologize, never admit that her actions were anything but justified. Years later, fate turned around like a wheel, grinding Madame Ifoma beneath its weight. Her once strong frame, the woman who could roar loud enough to make a crowd silent, grew frail as sickness clung to her bones. The doctors called it a relentless illness, one that wealth could not cure. Her savings, the riches she had clung to so tightly, dwindled on hospital bills, and her once proud voice softened into whispers of pain. But what broke her heart the most was not the sickness, it was her daughter Adobe, her only daughter, the one she had spoiled and shielded from every hardship. She visited rarely and was always with a stiff, cold expression. "Mama, I'm busy," she would say, scrolling through her phone as her mother winced in pain. "You have nurses. What else do you want?" Ifoma would turn her face to the wall, the weight of her loneliness pressing heavier than the disease itself. She never taught her daughter compassion, and her daughter did not have it to give. Her riches sat unused in the bank, but they felt like ash in her hands. For the first time, she understood the emptiness of a life built on pride and cruelty, and the sting of being treated like she no longer mattered. One quiet evening, Ifeoma felt a soft familiar hand slip into hers. She turned her head and saw Kambili, no longer the trembling orphan that she had tormented. Kambili was a grown woman, strong and gentle. She sat by her bed, her eyes kind, as she looked at her aunt with love. "Why are you here?" Ifeoma asked, her voice brittle. "After everything I did to you, why?" Kambili's lips trembled before she answered softly. "Because, auntie, when my parents died, I had no one, and even in your cruelty, you are still my family, and no matter what, no one deserves to die alone." Tears welled in Ifeoma's eyes, hot, bitter tears that she hadn't shed in years. For the first time in her life, she said, "I'm sorry, Kambi, for everything." Kambili squeezed her hand gently. "Rest, auntie, it's all forgiven." That night, Ifeoma drifted into sleep with a peace that she had not known in decades. And though she would pass on weeks later, she did so with Kambili by her side. The very girl who she had once humiliated for brushing her teeth now turned out to be the only soul who showed her what true humanity looked like. The lesson to be learned from this story is that life has a way of humbling even the proudest heart. Madame Ifeoma's riches could not save her from sickness, nor could they buy her love when she lay frail and forgotten. The daughter she spoiled turned cold, leaving her to face her final days in loneliness. Yet, the orphan she once beat, shamed and humiliated for something as small as brushing her teeth, was the only one who stayed by her side, offering forgiveness instead of bitterness. So remember this: treat even the smallest soul with love, for the kindness you sow today will be the hand that holds you when the shadows of life falls. If this story touched your heart, like and share so others can feel the lessons too. And don't forget to subscribe to Innes Folktales for more stories that heal, teach, and stir your soul. I hope you enjoyed the story.